Then you ask, my beloved source universe, is it absolutely true that I'm an extension of this amazing stardust that you made me? Am I absolutely good enough to be here to receive blah, blah, blah? Yes or no? And what do you hear?
Yes.
Okay, it has to be, can I accept that?
Yeah.
Because without working with the acceptance, the human being has a tendency to go back to that default of doubting our self-worth or enoughness. Of course, you're good enough to have it, but that's not the issue. The issue is I'm not accepting it. The work is in the acceptance of what we are shown in this divine world. Can you accept what you're hearing and intuiting and experiencing? That's where the real work is, and that's the hardest part.
Hello, I'm Lila Vento with Mystics, Muses, and Sacred Sites. And I'm here today with a woman who's a bit of a mystery. I don't know much other than a friend said she had the most hair-raising mystical stories that he had ever heard. And I've heard that you have 23 years studying with a Sufi Master, and that's all I know. So I just want to hear, what I want to do is to share more mystical stories and kind of affirm the reality of the mystical world, of the spiritual world, of the world that exists beyond the material plane that most of our society says is the only real thing. So that's my intention with this channel. So do you want to introduce yourself and give us some stories or background? Where do you want to start?
Yeah, I go by Halima, and that is a Sufi name I was given back in 2001. It was through a series of mystical experiences that I crossed paths with a Sufi master from the Middle East. And how that happened was also in and of itself magical. When I first spoke to him, I had not met him until a year later. So everything was over the phone. And what I always found mystical was that every time I called him, he would pick up the phone, even though I learned much later that he had thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of students. So even after all of those years, I found that interesting. But I go by Halima, and I've been doing spiritual work really since I was really young, at a very young age, but didn't know I was doing it. And so now over the years, I used to do readings in large groups and teachings and lots of that stuff, but now I don't do any of that. I just let spirit move me where I need to be, and I show up where I'm supposed to be. And I'll have people call me from around the world, and I'll work with them either for a short time or a little bit longer. And that range is quite diverse. I even worked with a gentleman that was dumpster diving in Alabama and had a third grade education. He turned out to be one of my greatest teachers, all the way to people that were in the NFL to people in Hollywood. So the mass amount of diversity that I've worked with is great. And I encourage people that do this work to go outside of their own ethnicity and to be open to diversity and to look at the wealth and beauty of the world, because I think there's so much still to learn. So
How did you meet the dumpster diving guy? Can you tell us a little bit about that story?
yeah, so I have a dear friend who is a professor at Auburn University, and I had gone out there to visit, and he was on someone's property doing landscaping. And I asked my friend, I felt a very, very, very strong pull towards him. And I'll describe what that feels like. It's not a thought, it's literally a drawing or a turning towards. It's almost like a curiosity in terms of a feeling state. And so as I turned to him, he was across the street, and he looked like he hadn't had a place to live in a long time. So long story short, my dear friend said, "Oh, his name is such and such, and would you like to say hi?" And as soon as she said, "Would you like to say hi?" I literally saw the two of us on an energetic level connecting. And so I said, "I'll be right back." And I walked over, and just I'm getting chills even as I'm saying it. But as we locked eyes, it just came out of me, and I said, "Would you like a healing?" And I had
Mhm.
literally never said that to somebody I had never met. So long story short, we started communicating, and he came over to my friend's house, and indeed, he had not had a shower in a month. I don't, uh, he had no place to live, but he was what all of the community called like a plant wizard. He was just a mystical guy that knew how to take care of trees and plants and soil. And so he comes into the house, and part of this Arabic healing requires that I take his shoes and socks off.
Mhm.
And in the moment, it didn't occur to me because I was just so deeply wanting to serve him. So I asked him if he'd be okay if he took his shoes and socks off, and he said, "Of course." And long story short, I start this healing, and it's all in Arabic.
Mhm.
And I said to him, "There's going to come a point where I'm going to ask you, is there anything that you need?" And when I got to that point, he didn't ask for a house or a home to live in. He didn't ask for food. He did not ask for health, well-being. He said, "What I really need is I need to understand the spirit within me."
Mhm.
And I just got this overpowering sense of chills came over my body. Fast forward a year later, my friend called me, and she's like, "Halima, you're never going to believe this. He showed up at our house, and he said that you came to him in a dream," which I remember. And he said that I was in the corner of his room, and that I was pulling all of this yellow stuff out of him. I did not know at the time that I met with him that he had a broken ankle. He had
Mhm.
pancreatic cancer.
Wow.
I didn't ask for any of his history. I just served him.
Yeah.
And so he's alive to this day. He still lives in Alabama,
Yeah.
and I still communicate with him probably once a year. And he gave me this beautiful Christmas gift of a card with a dollar bill in it. And just I don't know. That's people like that. They just move you to so much depth you can't even describe it sometimes. So
Yeah.
just one example of
Amazing.
many.
Yeah, I felt called to just ask about that one, and just to again, just to reinforce that this is not abnormal when you're kind of functioning in this realm of consciousness, or whatever we want to call it. Um, so I don't have as long of an experience as you do in the healing arts. My powers just kind of came online in February. And so I was at a party, and I was having this very intense awakening. Like I felt like a little baby bird that just hatched, and I was like all like open and raw and gloopy, and like could barely move and function, just like completely open to a lot of energy. And I was at this party, and there was a boy there, boy man, like 23 years old, and there was a lot of heavy dark energy, and I was compelled to ask him, "Would you like a healing?" I'd never done a healing. I haven't
Yeah.
trained in any healing. I was just guided. And at first, I was going to kind of do healing on the side because everyone was dancing, but my intuition was like, "No, ask consent." And so it's like, okay. So I asked him if he wanted healing. And so I just started, I do a form of somatic meditation, which is intuitive movement. And so I was kind of doing this movement, but all of a sudden I felt this intense pain in my stomach. And I knew I was kind of drawing it out of him, whatever pain or suffering he was having. And he was missing part of his leg. He was missing the lower half of his left leg. As I was doing my work, it was really uncomfortable, and I almost felt like I was going to throw up. And but I didn't throw up. And so I could see his energy lightening. And then eventually my intuition was like, okay, you're done. And so I gave him a hug, and then went off to the rest of the party. And I found out a few days later that he was struggling with a heroin addiction,
Yeah.
and in a very dark place. And I didn't know any of this consciously, but um, yeah, I just see some parallels between these stories. And I think when we start to listen to our intuition and do what it tells us, then there's a lot of magic and miracles and these amazing connections that you never could have figured out logically, or straight up miracles like curing pancreatic cancer. most people, when they had pancreatic cancer, they die. Thank you for sharing that story.
Well,
Um,
one thing you bring up, and I think it's important for people that are maybe just entering into this world, or even those that have been around for a long time, there's an energetic commitment when you ask somebody, may I serve you? Or may I offer you some teachings or a healing? Because when the person says yes, even their higher consciousness says yes, or their inner being says yes, there's an agreement there in that moment versus just doing something for someone when we're
mhm,
not asking and we're not connecting. Most of all the teachers I've ever studied with said it's important that you are in that collaborative energy with that person. So I actually love that you just had the inclination to connect with his heart and ask.
which I
And
didn't want to. I didn't want to ask because it seemed weird and uncomfortable. And I was at a party and I'm like, this is weird. But I tried to do what I'm told. Yeah.
well, well, there's an old saying, and I do teach this all the time for many years, but in the old days, I used to work in treatment centers out in Los Angeles. And in the old treatment model back in the day, it used to be where, and no offense to people that may do interventions today, this is just a story that I want to emphasize a point to. In the old days, all the family members or loved ones or partners or husbands or wives or lovers, whatever, would get together and they would write these beautiful, heartfelt letters. And can't you see that your alcohol or addiction or whatever is affecting the family and blah, blah, blah. And they might be crying and there's this big group and there's the therapist there and all these people. And that person would invariably give in and say yes to that and go out to, Malibu and do their 45 days. And they would come back and relapse over 81% of the time. And what we discovered of the relapse is because they never chose it for themselves. And so we now know one of the biggest fears for people who have a loved one or an adult child or child who's struggling with addiction, especially heroin or anything, is if we try to talk that person into something and their inner being is not in a yes to that, you'll
Mhm.
see these chaotic patterns occur. And I encourage everyone to work on their own inner self about what happens if we feel like we don't do something for someone or we don't go out of our way to give them money or help them, because there's a contract there for that individual. Some souls come for a very short amount of time, some make it out and are able to do and handle things like this gentleman you're talking about. So I just wanted to offer that as a encouragement.
Yeah, and I have two experiences that came up. One was like a decade ago. I was in a shamanic meditation group, and I was with a friend, and I realized that I could affect his energy with my energy and like give him a boost, but then he would just drop back down because I wasn't asking consent. So I could take his stuff for a minute, but since he hadn't engaged in that consensual relationship, there was no lasting change. So I was
Yeah.
like, oh, okay. Like I just learned through playing around, fucking around, and finding out. And my father was an alcoholic and died of
Mm.
alcoholism. And we tried to help him, in the family. And I finally had to get to the point of just because I felt like, oh, if I don't save him, I'm a bad daughter. And I had to let that go and say, okay, he's choosing, like he doesn't want to be helped or saved. And I need to respect that. And I need to take the guilt off of myself for being a bad daughter and not like forcing him to change. And that was a tough, as a people pleaser and just with my own expectations of what a daughter looks like and does. It was a hard choice to make, but also very loving to myself of like letting myself off the hook.
Yeah, for two reasons. One, this is one of 8 very powerful spiritual principles that I've learned from masters. One is I can't control the conditions of another human being, and I never, 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 never will. For example, could you control the thoughts in your father's mind? Yes or no?
No,
Can you control the cells in his body? Yes or no?
no,
Right? Can you control the perception of how he was raised? Yes or
no.
no?
Which
So,
he was born in the Magdalen laundries in Ireland, where if you
uh,
were unwed in Ireland, you were taken to a prison basically, and you were held there, and you gave
yeah,
birth in traumatic situations, and then they took the child and sold them to Americans, adopted them out through the Catholic
uh,
Church system. So, and
yeah.
he was there till he was 4. He was 4 years old when he was finally adopted. So I'm just like, who can even imagine what he went through? like, so no, I could not, I could not save him.
Yeah. And I learned something recently that, and this is going to, I hope it hits your heart deeply because I think it's important to hear this because it really affected me. And this was just recently. Uh, a very powerful teacher said to me recently that often parents agree to go forth first as a portal for the spiritual beings that are coming in to expand mass consciousness. So my father, very similar to yours, came in, was not equipped to be a parent,
Yeah.
but my soul came in through that portal. And so oftentimes we think our parents are so supposed to be perhaps at a certain level or be at a certain maturity or be at a certain, and it was never intended to be that way. And often it's intended to be that way so that we can be free, but we often interpret that as abandonment.
Mm-hmm.
We think that, why doesn't this parent there and love me? Why can't they get themselves together? And so then as a child, we had all that mixed up into our monkey brain thinking we're responsible and somehow we have the power to control whether he or she drinks or doesn't drink. And never mind that there's no God in that, there's no spirit in that, there's no universe in that, there's no Allah in that, because we're not responsible for that human being as much as we would like for them to be different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I have two daughters, and I've known from the beginning and said if they had wanted enlightened parents, they would have chosen enlightened parents. And I'm doing better than my parents did, and I try to keep that perspective of every soul is on its own journey. And so, like, again, letting myself off the hook for my failings as a parent, as much as I wanted to be this perfect ideal parent, I wasn't, and I'm not, and letting that be okay and trusting that there's reasons and gifts, and they clearly chose me. My daughter came down and intuitively told myself and her father that she wanted to be born with us as her parents,
Yeah.
and we said yes, even though it was insane. We weren't together. I didn't have any money. I was like nomadic, living with friends on couches. So yeah. So do you want to hop back to maybe how you met your Sufi master?
So I was at a job in Austin. I was one of two trainers in the state of Texas that worked with over 52 nonprofits all over Texas doing trainings that varied between interracial dating to board development, all the way down into social work aspects and community work. Um, because even in places like Longview, Texas, when I took this job, they still had colored only on the bathrooms here up in Texas.
Yeah.
So I took this job. I did not like the job, but it was a job and I knew that I was supposed to be there. I just didn't understand why. So one day, my colleague, uh, the way my desk sat, if I turned to my right, was this long hallway to my boss's office and then other offices. So my colleague comes down the hallway and I feel this vortice start moving. And I went, oh my God, like I had this very clear, I had that clear thought of, oh shit, my life is about to dramatically change. It was both terrifying
Huh?
and also exciting. It was just this swirling energy. So she's walking towards me. I didn't know her. I mean, I only knew her for maybe, I didn't really know her. She steps into the doorwell of my office and she said, hey, I have this healing with this guy from North Carolina. I can't make it. Do you want it? And again, once again, my being said yes. I had no idea what I was getting into. So I said yes. About a month later, I go meet this person. And he starts doing what they call the hand of Allah healing, which I had never heard of. It felt kind of cultish and I'm going to
Mhm.
cuss, kind of fucking weird. I was like, what is this? But I'm sitting across from this guy and he starts doing this, whatever thing he was doing. And I start feeling my inner heart chakra started spinning. And as it was spinning, I was going into some of my past lives and I was like, wow, I had experienced it through that vehicle. This was in 2000, This is in 2000. So when it was all said and done, he said, would you consider going up to Santa Rosa, California and doing a healing retreat? Again, I say yes to things when I'm drawn to it, even though I don't know what I'm doing. So I said yes. And I meet this, at the time, one of the top 3 medical intuitives in the world was there. And he says to me, he goes, you're a teacher of the unity, quote unquote.
Mhm.
And I had known that was when I was a kid, but I blew it off most of my life. And he's telling me all of this stuff. So I get back to Austin, and 3 months later, the cancer shows up.
Mm.
So everything, my teachers have always told me, my guides have told me, everything is foreshadowed. So they will show you in advance. You'll move into it. They'll show you in advance and you move into it.
Mhm.
So all of this is happening. I come back to Austin. The cancer shows up out of nowhere. So I call him, and he said, I need you to call this holy man in the Middle East.
Mhm.
And I call him through a train. He didn't speak any English. So I'm on a 3-way call with these individuals. And I said to him, I just got diagnosed with cancer. It's pretty advanced. Was given less than 10 or 11% chance of survival. And he said to me, and I quote, don't listen to the doctors. I will send you a formula. No big deal. And he hung up on me. This is a true story.
And I
And he
just
would
want to
always
ask you, I want to ask really quick, were you like when the cancer arrived, were you in an emotional place where you were not in a good state emotionally and mentally, or do you think it was just more of a healing crisis to push you down this path?
and actually I was alone in my car, it was the greatest thing that ever happened to me, to be honest. When I got the official diagnosis, I was actually sitting in the car outside of this radiology building, and I was sitting in my car, and I just started crying out of relief,
Mm.
because it's never been about the cancer. And I try to teach people the medical stuff is really so less important than, as you know, what's behind that.
Mm.
So I sat there and I was relieved, because I knew I needed something so massive
Mhm.
to push me into my destiny.
Yeah.
So I was relieved. I got thrown off the side of the cliff.
Hmm.
I couldn't fight anymore, which is exactly for me what I needed. This is just for me.
Hmm.
And so after that, everything took off. And I called him, received this little plastic bottle with a little piece of paper that said cancer formula on it with a piece of tape on it. I'm not joking. And I had Dr. Barsky from UCLA and Dr. Eva Singletary from MD Anderson in Houston. We're both, on my medical team, and they wanted me to do, 8, 9 months of chemo and the tamoxifen and all this kind of
Yeah.
stuff. And he told me on the phone, again through a translator, if you do this, you'll die. And when he said that to me, I knew 100% that he was telling me the truth. It was just a state of knowing.
Yeah.
And so I made the decision. I'm going to go ahead and drive the car all the way in, and I never looked back. And this was now 24 years later.
Hmm. Mm. I love that being. I don't know. I don't know if you said being pushed into your destiny or pushed off the cliff into your destiny, but I've again going back to February. I feel like that's what happened to me, where I was like shoved into my destiny and
Yeah.
shown a vision of my destiny, which like terrified me because it was so much bigger than the life I've been living for the past 45 years. And and things started to just fall away and fall apart, and I was led to quit multiple jobs that I was working at the time that were not my soul path purpose, and then I was kind of squeezed through this birth canal for all of my deepest shadows and fears to come up. And it
Mhm.
definitely felt like I was pushed off of a cliff into like towards my destiny. Of course I had free will and I could make the choices whether to step up and make that choice to go down that road, or to just be like, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to try to stay normal, which I'm sure then the lessons sort of kept coming and I would have gotten pushed harder and harder. But I think it's a good reminder that sometimes when our destiny comes, it's not always like light and unicorns and this easy path. Though you said, you felt a relief even with the cancer diagnosis that it felt.
Oh, I was so relieved. I'm a hardhead and I've been through
Yeah.
so much. Part of I'm in the process of having the first 21 years of my life being made into a movie. Right now, I'm going to London in a week and a half, and I'm only bringing that up not because of whether it happens or not, but it's in the queue. But I think when you face so much adversity and you go through so much, there really isn't fear anymore. It's really just the mind's doubt that creates that or opens that.
Yes. The doubt. I've been fighting with the doubt lately, today, yesterday. Yeah.
Well, I met this shaman, went to the Amazon rainforest for about 12 straight years. And one of the shamans, through a translator, said, doubt, which comes from the mind, it's a thought or a belief or an assumption or perception, leads to, in the heart, an emotion like fear.
Mm-hmm.
And then the fear can lead to nervous system, body anxiety, panic attacks. He said, you cannot have one without the other. He said, so many Americans start with, I'm afraid of this, I'm afraid of that. And he said they don't even realize that they've got an operating or a program in their mind that is creating a story or a narrative or a belief or an assumption that really goes unchecked. And so back in the day, he would say most Americans out of every other group that comes into the Amazon are the ones that carry that program the strongest.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, why would you be afraid? He said, everything that shows up in front of you is for you, and what you find is also for you. And he said, when you realize that 80% of your destiny is already planned even before you're born, he said,
Yeah.
it's really about learning how to go on the journey and do your best. He said, you might fight it like I did. He goes,
Mm-hmm.
but eventually where you're supposed to be will show up regardless.
And that's the realization I had the other day. Our society, Western society, is the only society in probably the history of the world, at least that we know of currently, that has this schizophrenic split between the material and the spiritual. And we're being gaslit essentially. And so, like, oh, the spiritual world is not real, it's just the material world. And every other culture, every indigenous culture, every other culture is like, no, there's ancestors, there's the divine, there's spirits, there's demons, there's angels, there's all this other stuff going on. Our culture is the only one that denies all of that. And I feel like that's the basis of the doubt, where we can feel what's true and real, and we are it, so we know that it's there below what we've been programmed and gaslit about. Yeah.
The way I would probably teach that would be more of, when somebody is struggling, even with their own religion or their own spirituality or their own inner knowing or what we call gut feeling to a higher consciousness, whatnot, it's really a separation within their own heart.
Mm-hmm.
I tend to tell people to go more towards what is the separation in your heart, because the greater the contrast within a person's heart, the worse they're going to feel.
Mm-hmm.
Meaning the more conflict they feel, or they're torn, whether it could be something as massive of, I'm supposed to leave my husband, or what this person at my church is telling me doesn't feel true for me. It's
Mm-hmm.
the contrast and the conflict within the human heart is what's creating the cognitive dissonance or the anxiety or whatnot. So of all the teachers and masters I've worked with, they tend to have told me in different ways, the human being has to bow their intellect, their third eye towards their heart, because everything else is illusion. Even the word gaslit is a word that is used in a way that doesn't really help people understand that they are in separation deeply inside. Maybe they don't want to acknowledge that they come from a family where there's been murderers, or they come from a family. I worked in South Central LA, for example, as a social worker. Sometimes it's hard to admit that you have a brother that has gang raped somebody or murdered somebody. And the only way that people can cope with that strong reality is to shut down. They don't want to shut down. But in that instant, when you're surrounded by things that are so much bigger than your ability emotionally and spiritually to handle, they create such a separation within their own inner knowing. And that's how I would talk to people that
Mm-hmm.
are struggling with that.
I like that you bring it back to our own capacity to work with the separation in our hearts rather than we're being gaslit by some external force.
The only reason I say that is because this is not about you or any of us, but the statement implies and shows that I'm giving my power away to a construct that has zero to do with my own inner power.
Yeah.
So in order to maintain my own inner power, I have to understand where I am in separation with my power. So last year, my guides had told me we started a decade of self-mastery last year, a decade. So imagine, well, what does self-mastery really means? It means taking full responsibility for one's life.
Mm-hmm.
And to do that, we have to understand that nothing happens to us unless we allow it. That's it, period. And once we realize that we have and have always had, we are never truly separate from that inner power, then all of the outside stuff means absolutely nothing. But if we're in conflict with that and we're still battling and giving our power away to that, then we are going to feel like we are in bondage with that. And that's really where the disconnect is.
Let's backtrack to your mystic Sufi teacher. So did you eventually go to the Middle East to study with him in person, or did he come to the States?
He came to the state, and I was probably one of very few that got to sit in the tent. It's a joke. I should write a book and title it, I Got to Sit in the Tent. But what I mean by that is he would come to the United States for an extended period of time and go to different cities and sit with sometimes hundreds of people. And people would line up, and one by one, they would come out into the tent with a translator and he would speak to them. And so I got to sit with him for hours and hours and hours and days and weeks and months. And I learned so much by watching him, a true master. He would what we would call a true seer. He had the ability to I've never met anybody like him since. I'll just put that in perspective. I've met a ton of curanderas and shamans and psychics and all that, but I've never met anyone like him. And so I would sit with him initially and I would learn by observing him. He would never allow me to ask a single question in the beginning. I just learned by witnessing. So for years I would watch him and learn, and I would ask questions outside. And then he started allowing me to be with him 3 o'clock in the morning, 5 o'clock in the morning. He would smoke his hookah. And I was allowed to start asking questions. And when I say allowed, I don't mean an issue with male and female, but you don't just sit down with somebody like that, because I learned from him that, words don't teach, life experience does. And he had to know that I had a level of gnosis where I could sit and articulate what I was witnessing without asking him what I was witnessing. And so I started sitting with him, and he would tell me stories. Oh my God, several of which I told Tristan, but he would tell me stories that in the beginning I would feel my impatience. Like, is he going to get to the end? And where's this going? And I was all caught up in my shit in the beginning. But then I realized over many, many years, the story within the story, and indigenous, there's circular communication. And so through the journey of that, the end would be so like on all channels, would hit me at every channel. And then I was like in awe at how he could take a situation and turn it into a teaching moment. And that was mastery to me.
So initially, when you were sitting with him and not asking questions, what was it that what you were learning? Were you witnessing him doing healings on people, or was he just like counseling people that would come to him?
I only one time in 24 years did I witness him heal a man's lung cancer right in front of me. And it was stunning. Before it would be in closed doors, but there was a small group of us one night, and it was a therapist out in San Francisco, Portland. I don't remember, it's been too many years, but he healed that man's lung cancer right in front of me.
Did you
But
see something come out, or how did you know it was healed?
yes. Yeah. And then it was confirmed later by the man's blood results. But back to your question, imagine if you bring 100 people to sit with him and they all have what would be perceived as a similar pattern or issue.
Mm-hmm.
What he would teach one person could be completely different to another person, even though they all had the same pattern.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, that was a master. He didn't say the same thing to each person.
Mm-hmm.
He had the ability to look within that soul to see things that went way beyond the five senses and then be able to describe it. And in the early days, I found that fascinating. For example, the issue of prostitution, the issue of abortion, the issue of sexual abuse, the issue of infidelity in a marriage. For example, a dear friend of mine, I knew her for a long time. She'd been married to her husband for 17 years. And I was sitting behind her going next to talk to this individual, this holy man. And I heard him. So she knelt down and she asked him if he would do a holy marriage for her and her husband. In his languaging, a holy marriage just meant a different type of energetic merging of their souls. Because in America, it's a traditional wedding type of deal. So as she finished the question, he raised his head, and this is what he said. He said, "When you make taba," and I'll explain what that means. When you make taba for your pain to your husband, then and only then I will grant that holy ceremony. And she was so taken aback. Taba in Arabic means to forgive yourself first, because he was very clear what he said.
Mm-hmm.
Forgive yourself first. Then you must acknowledge, getting chills, to your beautiful husband what happened. And all of a sudden she burst out in cartoon tears, like, and this is something that happened in 30 seconds. This is not contemplating or so she gets up and she's sobbing. I sit with him and I get up and I walk over to her and I said, "What the heck happened?" And she's like, "Halima, I cheated on my husband in the first year of our marriage and I never told him." And this is how precise he was. He was so precise, no judgment, never judgment, by the way, only love. And so he would give you the gift and then he would watch you to see how you were going to adjust to the gift. Now I'll give you the contrast of that. Took a dear client of mine into the tent, and this individual had skin cancer. And my client, who's the wife, comes in with the husband, who I didn't know very well. Again, there's the translator, me, there is one of the other teachers, and this couple. And Sidi's talking rapidly in Arabic to the interpreter. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, alhamdulillah rabbil alamin. So he's telling this interpreter that the man here is not going to be happy about what I'm going to say. He says, "My love, you will see." Those were his words. "My love, you will see." So he stops turning in Arabic and he turns to this man and he said, "Your hands have not been clean. When you make taba for your hands not being clean, then I will speak to you about your skin cancer." I mean, all hell broke loose. And this is a man that didn't want to go. He was very, really rude to this holy man. And long story short, from this healer, from this Sufi Master's understanding in the energy body, skin cancer has to do with some wrongdoing sexually, emotionally with one's hands. So he walks out and the couple gets in a huge fight. Now this was in 2002 or 3. You can imagine how I feel. I had no idea that this holy man was going to say that. I had this assumption, which kept getting broken and broken and broken year after year. I thought, oh, this holy man is going to treat him the same way that he, I'm thinking, I'm making this all up in my mind. It's going to be pretty and it's going to be perfect for the couple. And no, it was the complete opposite. So I walk over and the couple is fighting and it turned really ugly. And long story short, he had had a inappropriate relationship with a young girl.
Mm.
And the holy man invited him back 3 times. He said, "This is no problem, no problem for you." He
Mhm.
said, "But you need to take responsibility for it.
Mhm.
It's no problem." He said, my love, my beloved son, this is no problem. I
Mhm.
will hold your heart."
Yeah.
He's telling the man, "I come into my space, come into my heart.
Yeah.
I will work with this outer stuff." He doesn't care about cancer. He never cared about cancer was nothing to him. But you understand that. So when I say mastery, it was like a chess game. Everything had a reason and
Yeah.
an energy, and I could tell you there's thousands of stories like that. So and he never went back. He
Mhm.
refused to acknowledge it. And anyway, so that's an example of when I say I got to witness a lot. Then I just shut up. In the last 14 years of being around him, I just shut my mouth and started learning without asking anything until I got to the point. Then he would say to me, "My beloved daughter, what do you see?"
Mm.
And then I would share with him what I see, and he would say, "Yes, my love, this is good. Yes, my love, this is
Mm.
good." I'm like, okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think immediately of Ho'oponopono, which is "I'm sorry, please forgive me, thank you, I love you," where you take 100% ownership for everything, even if you're in a situation where you don't feel like you did anything wrong to the other person or whatever, but you just are asking yourself and the divine for forgiveness for anything and everything, and it really does. I've seen it work these small miracles and change people's energy in
Yeah.
really crazy ways. But it's interesting that taking that full self mastery, ownership, responsibility over all of reality really is what teaching is.
Yeah, and he says Allah does not need your forgiveness. So, and this is just my teachers. All of the teachers I work with don't support that I have to ask God, Spirit, Source, Allah, the universe for forgiveness, because this is all part of our destiny. What he does say, it's more within the human, it's in the heart, within the being that's carrying the wrongdoing until that human washes the wrongdoing, forgives the wrongdoing, whatever
Mhm.
languaging, because really it's our own inner conflict with ourself that doesn't allow us to heal. Um, so yeah, I mean, yeah, I still to this day, I've never met, he died, unfortunately. He was really late into no one really knew his age, probably 90, but
Yeah.
he had close to 1,800,000, 900,000 people that came to
Wow.
his funeral
Wow.
in the Middle East. And here I am, this little white girl in Austin, Texas, could call him anytime and he'd pick up the phone. That's how crazy it is. It seems surreal, but
So do you feel you had like a past life relationship or was
oh,
what was the story there? Do you know consciously what the history was?
yeah, that's really a cool story. The first time I ever literally met him in person, I was kneeling down, taking my shoes off, and I felt this vortice of air spinning in this house that I was showing up to meet him in person for the first time. And I look up and I saw him. And the moment I saw his face, I recognized him.
Mhm.
And on that same weekend, I said, there's times that I've met people that I know I've known, even though this is the first time. And he's like, "Yes, my love, my love." He said, "This is incredible. I've never heard anyone say this. I've never seen it written this way." He said, "Souls are created in batches like stars in the universe."
Mm.
I just got chills. And then he held up his hands and he said, "You will meet batches of souls, 3 or 4 you will have had many, many relationships with over many, many lifetimes.
Mm.
Others are new, they're intermediaries," he called them. He said they enter for a short time. They're not meant to be long time
Mhm.
friends. He said, but he goes, "People think, oh, you're supposed to hold on to people forever. This is not true."
Yeah.
So anyway, he's describing all of this. And then he said to me, "I've known you for 3,000 years." And I said, "I know, I've met you many times." So and I still get chills
Mm.
telling the story, but that moment was a kaleidoscope of many dimensional interactions he and I had had for many, 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 many years. And it all came together in that moment in this house that he was staying at. I was just blessed to go hang out with this guy for 4 hours,
Yeah.
in the early days.
I've heard not the way that was said. That was beautiful, but like soul pods or soul families. I've met a number in my life where there was an immediate recognition and a knowing, even though we
Yeah.
never met before.
Well, one of my guides has been with me for close to 1 million, and I know most people don't want to believe that, but I say him because he feels from a three-dimensional view more male to me. I wouldn't describe him as female necessarily, but he's about 7 foot tall, and I met him when I was living in Long Beach, California in the early 80s was the first time it showed me its full dimensional. And I went back to a time when everything was vibrational on a being level. There was no form to my being.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's been with me since I was very little.
Hmm. So you mentioned 8 teachings, I think. 8
Eight
spiritual
spiritual
principles.
principles. Mhm.
Principles. What can you share those? What are those?
I can send them to you. It'd be easier for you to get the full breadth of them. But one is you can't control the conditions of another human, and you never will. A very simple one is you can't change the past, and you never will. Another one is no one ever and will never uh, feel your own emotion. We can empathize with somebody's emotion. We can identify with that emotion, but we can't feel what someone else feels. And the reason why that is a spiritual principle is because so often humans confuse very deeply what a thought and a feeling is, and then
Mhm.
they make it their own, and they project their own stuff onto somebody without ever allowing that person to feel the full breadth of their emotion. And that's a huge issue in this country. I would
Mhm.
say to this day, 70% of most people I meet, especially spiritual people, they often don't even know the difference.
Mhm.
They think they're feeling something, but it's often a construct in their mind. So that's just one of them.
Yeah.
The simple ones are gravity. I trigger yoga people all the time. Like we're grounded all the time. We do things externally to ground ourselves, but we don't ever really tune into the gravity, the actual resonance field of gravity that holds us on this planet. The other one is the notion of duality. Obviously, there's no duality in the universe, but duality, the concept of duality affects us very, very deeply in this world. Right, wrong, boy, girl, up, down. We're born into that duality, and that's really detrimental because again, it creates a level of separation that is never intended to be that way. Anyway, those are some of them.
And going back to doubts, because the doubt is what I've been struggling with just in these last few days. Because I mentioned that a few days ago, a big giant glass of water spilled on my laptop, and my laptop is not currently functioning. And I'm in the process of moving to Greece. We're selling everything we own, and I'm taking my 2 daughters. And we've been called. We were called in February. I was told, get rid of all your shit, get your finances in order. You're moving. And I was like, oh, where are we going? So we're going to Greece, and I have a story that I need my laptop to survive and to make money in this world and in this online world. And before this incident with the laptop, I was in a very good place of like, okay, like I'm grounded and I'm living this like spirit led life and I'm connected to my intuition and everything's divine and it's all good. And then this happens. And then like all the doubt comes up again. So I don't know. Can you speak a little bit to what you had mentioned about like the mind and the thoughts versus the heart and the doubt?
Yeah, I'd be honored to. So, doubt leads to fear, fear leads to anxiety. You can't have one without the other. So if we look at two things my guides just said to you. One is is really a perception you're holding about money, but I'll address that in a minute. But the other is there's an assumption there that created then the opposite, which is the doubt of, if I don't have, for example, the laptop, then A, B, and C can't happen per se. That's number one. Number two, I have always learned that water, when water spills, even my guide down in the Amazon rainforest said that when water is spilled, it's actually a deep cleansing. It's actually the washing of a long held belief, quote unquote. So if we took all of that and then we added the concept of money, which is like the Batman symbol in the sky, it's just an extension of either our connection to spirit or our separation with spirit, meaning one's relationship to money is in direct proportion to one's relationship with spirit. So if I'm more attached to money and fear of money and conflict over money, afraid I'm not going to have money, the farther away I am from that, I will be cared for, acknowledged, receive whatever I need from the universe. Well, so you've got all four of those operating, all four instantly in the moment that the water spills on the laptop.
Which, and also I had been going through this deep grieving cleansing process around specifically my creativity and how that was squelched as when I was a child, because I was very talented artistically, and I was told you can't make a living being an artist. You can't make a living being an artist. So I stopped and I went down the academic route and majored in, and then I went back to art in college. But then after I got out of college, I was like, okay, I can't make a living being an artist, and I won't go into advertising. So I have all this I have all this grief that I had been processing that night. And I'd found this big file folder from like 2009, 2010, when I first started waking up, and just looking through all these papers, saying all these spiritual truths that I'm much more embodied in now. But it's all the same stuff around, fear of not enoughness and the doubt of like, okay, is this real? Is spirit real? Is my intuition real? And so I was processing those things when that water spilled. So yeah.
Well, again, if we look at the beauty of water, which is a cleansing, I can tell you that the laptop is not going to be an issue for you, meaning you're going to go whether you have it or not, and you're going to be fine whether you have it or not. But there is a level to be a true spiritual teacher, and I'm using those words loosely because different cultures have different labels for those. But if you're moving towards the space of serving, all of this is, we're going to all figure it out together, and you will figure it out. But what it did is it opened up a channel for you to look at the attachments. Maybe Buddhists would say the attachment to the laptop, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
But either way, it's going to require you to look at whatever assumption you're holding in your heart about this object called a laptop. Will you survive? If I say, my beloved source, universe, God, I'm begging for the truth on behalf of, your beautiful heart. Is it absolutely true that she will absolutely and is capable of moving forward? Yes or no, with or without this laptop? The answer is yes. And then we have to go, okay, that's the first part, which is the truth. The second part, which in your case is more important as a teacher, is please help me to accept this truth. I know deep down inside, yes, I know intellectually and emotionally and spiritually I will be fine. But really the deep work is accepting that, because you already know it's an object that we need in the 3D world. And at the same time, it happened.
Yeah.
So my guides used to tell me, quote unquote, if you did not orchestrate something, trust it came from spirit. So it's not like you call.
I love that.
So it's not like you called the glass of water up and said, hey, in 3 days, you're going to, I need you to spill all over my laptop so you can just make my life fucking miserable. Like you didn't orchestrate that. So when we can step back and realize that we didn't orchestrate, yes, we're in collaboration with the pad, the opening of that, but then you realize there's something grander going on and a deeper healing for you. That's how I would respond to that.
Yeah. And that's what I recognize, that it's a belief, that because most people be like, no, you need your laptop to work online. And I'm like, no, that's a belief that I'm engaging in. And I did Byron Katie's The Work. Is it true that I need my laptop to survive? No. who am I without that thought? And how do I feel when I think that thought? I've been processing it. Um,
But
and
remember, I think, remember what I just said. It's not that
yeah,
you've mastered that. It's the other
acceptance.
final part, which is, can you accept it?
Yeah.
The work is in the acceptance of what we are shown in this divine world. It's
Mhm,
for you, you're so far along. It's really the other side now. It's, can you
mhm,
accept what you're hearing and intuiting and experiencing? That's really where the real work is, and that's the hardest part.
mhm, mhm. And I have, up until now, struggled with money. And I've always had enough, but never more than enough, and often more debt than I had. And um, this year, the last few years, I've been focused on, okay, I want to make a living doing what I love, and I want to be of service in these ways that are not just being a web designer or doing normal jobs. And then early this year, I was told and instructed to burn all of the bridges that were not aligned with doing the healing work, the spiritual work. And I've been working through the terror of that, of fully stepping into the weird stuff that I'm here to do.
But
Um,
if I may, it's not
yeah.
terror, because it has to be a doubt first, number one. And number two, as you know, even in the basic chakra system, or the meridians, that second chakra holds creativity and power and money and sexuality. Like, there's no, it can't be any other way that if you came as a being to be a creative soul, it had what also has to be true is the healing in the relationship with what we call money and power. Power is money, money is power, creativity is power, sexuality is power, all of that. So it's not one or the other. It's just, it's the portal of that.
Mhm,
And knowing that you will and can move through that. It's about changing and moving out of the construct of the terror or the fear first,
mhm,
and holding space about, well, what is the doubt?
mm,
I doubt that this is going to happen for me. Well, that's a lot easier to work with than the fear or the terror. Or my doubt is, will I ever be able to maybe manifest enough prosperity and income and abundance for my heart to feel settled? Well, it's
mhm,
easier to work with that doubt than it is to feel the vibration
mhm,
of terror or fear. So it's
mhm,
still shifting over into this so that this can go away. Because when we stay in the vibration of, fear and terror and despair and all of that, it's a denser vibration
mhm, mhm. Yeah.
that doesn't allow us to move in a higher cadence, if you will.
Mhm. And yeah, I think my biggest doubt is like, am I enough? Am I good enough?
So you
Am
ask, what was the gentleman's name? Byron somebody?
Oh, Byron Katie. She's a woman and she
Okay,
has that
I've heard
process.
the name. Apologize for not knowing it was a woman. But so if you've done that, then you ask, my beloved source universe, is it absolutely true that
Mhm.
I'm an extension of this amazing stardust that you made me? Am I absolutely good enough to be here to receive blah, blah, blah? Yes or no? And what do you hear?
Yes.
Okay, again, it's not about the truth. It has to, for myself, all of us, it has to be, can I accept that?
Yeah.
Because without working with the acceptance, the human being has a tendency to go back to that default of doubting
Mhm.
our self-worth or enoughness. Of course, you're good enough to have it, but that's
Mhm.
not the issue. The issue is, I'm not accepting it.
And is that relating to receptivity in the feminine?
Well, again, there is an assault on the divine feminine in the energy world right now, but I do want to say, there's no, and you know this, there's no gender at the soul level. It's
Mhm.
there is much damage to the male energy, what we would call divine, that energy, the masculinity is there to the divine. So careful about responding to that. But yes, but it's much bigger than that.
Okay. Yeah. So is it more than not just receiving, but like accepting your own divinity?
Yes, and we've done a huge disservice to boys and men for centuries and centuries. They don't even know how to receive true, that
Yeah.
depth of love. So it's in the receptivity on all levels. It's knowing. To know is to receive. You can't know unless you've received it. And So again, it's the acceptance, it's the knowing, it's the receiving of whatever that moment may present.
Hmm. And the message, back in February when I was going through my awakening thing, the message that kept coming up was that men right now need heart healing, but specifically the back of the heart. And I was kind of led to do like hands-on healing, but there's something about the calcification in the back of the heart, specifically for men. And in my experience, like the divine love flows in through the back of the heart and then can flow outwards in like service and healing and love when you're tuned into that. And so I feel like there's that disconnect again, specifically for men, with their connection to the divine and receiving the divine love and then being able to channel that through them.
I think there's many entry points. The life cord is at the base of the back of the skull. I think there's the back of the heart chakra. I think I would just encourage you to keep trusting what you're being guided to in the moment. I think every culture has sometimes a different entry of the portal of how to do that. I personally don't think there's a right or wrong way to do it. I think it's whatever is called in the moment.
Mhm.
Because I've seen all kind of crazy shit that works.
Yeah.
So
So tell us,
uh,
tell us a crazy story. Like what's one of your favorite crazy stories, either with your master or in your life?
I was just telling this one recently, so it's more fresh on my heart. I was down in the Amazon rainforest, and I was doing a week of plant medicine, and a guy I had met a couple years showed up to the same ceremony. So we were on our respective mats, and uh, the shaman and the medicine women were doing phenomenal work. And as I look over at my friend, he's on his back, and I start seeing these Polaroid pictures coming out of his heart chakra,
Mhm.
and they were going through the sacred geometry. So the Polaroids were coming and they were moving through the spiral but exiting his heart.
Mhm.
And in the Amazon rainforest, they don't allow you ever to touch another human being when you're in the medicine space. I know people in the United
Mhm.
States are doing it and they're all this and that, but in my perspective, I agree with my shaman, and I'll tell you why,
Yeah.
even in the witnessing of something. So I look over, and the moment I'm witnessing this, my energy begins to merge, and I'm now witnessing the
Uh-huh.
Polaroids.
Uh-huh.
As I'm seeing the Polaroids, I'm drawn into the four-dimensional past life of this Polaroid image.
Uh-huh.
And so I'm moving dimensionally through his past, this current life that he was in, and all the trauma.
Mm.
And I'm
Good.
taken into a house where he was molested as a little boy. And the moment I'm taken into that Polaroid, I'm now in the room in 1978. I'm in the room. I'm witnessing him as a boy. Then I'm taken into another Polaroid where I see a swastika on his shoulder. And I went from one image to the next, and then before I knew it, I mean, it was an instant like explosion of energy through my crown chakra, and the shamans ran over to me. They
Mm.
pull me up, sit me down, and do a ventiata. A ventiata, and in the shamanic terms, is where they clean the energy with the shakapa.
Uh-huh.
And the reason they did that immediately is because I was actually connecting with the energy of that. And I was like blown away by that, because normally over all the years, I wouldn't pay attention to anyone but
Uh-huh.
my own space. But the vibrational ceremonial space was so powerful and so lit that the moment I even turned and started connecting with the pixels
Uh-huh.
of this Polaroid picture, it took me into his whole reality, and it was insane. So they take care of me, and then they go over to him, and they did. Oh my God, this man cried for hours, and he was receiving healing after healing. And the shaman, through a translator, said it's really important. He said, I am not opposed to tattoos, but he said tattoos carry an energy. He said, I really encourage you to go change the image of the tattoo, because the imprinting of the tattoo is actually holding the vibration of the
Uh-huh.
trauma that you had.
Wow.
And he kept repeating to this beautiful soul, he goes, this is not about, he would say, I'm no problem with tattoos, because
Yeah.
it wasn't about the idea that we love our tattoos, but he said they do carry an energy. And often when we imprint our body,
Mm.
and the imprinting of the tattoo is connected to a memory or a reaction to
Mm.
something that was horrible, he said it has an energy pattern to it.
Mm.
So when I turn, I'm being so psychic, I turn and man, I went down a portal of Polaroids of his life. So that was, I don't know if that's weird, but it was incredibly,
Yeah.
insanely intense. And I didn't
Yeah.
even touch him,
Yeah.
but I connected immediately with the energy of it. When you're in a heightened state of what we would call, whether it's Kundalini or any kind of a spiritual practice, even meditation,
Yeah.
the veils of that fourth dimension begins to lift, and so we are in proximity to the witnessing or the receiving or the vibrational transference, and it's supposed to be that way.
Yeah.
But and this is how most people recreate a trauma all over again, but that's a different conversation. So
Well, and that's what I was thinking of, like, how do I put this? I feel like most of us are still operating from so much trauma and these energetic patterns that are not clean. And especially like with sexual energy, there's a lot of, wounded feminine that seeks validation through getting the male attention, or, all these different dynamics. And so I think, since we are in our culture still babies working with these energies, and there is so much stuff and gunk, um, playing with these energies when we're not fully capable can re-traumatize or cause harm, or just muddy the energetics more.
well, it
Yeah.
has to be that way, and the word I would use is polarity. We have to have the contrast, because it's the only way that a man or a woman or anyone will ever learn how to use or abuse or receive or give that power. This is an issue of power, because you
Mm-hmm.
have to understand, men and women, are more and more women of merging into that cycle where they hurt or abuse. So I'm careful to say, it's in my experience, I don't focus on the gender. I focus on where did the power go, or where's the misuse of the power exchange. You
Mm-hmm.
can't have a battered woman without a batterer.
Mm-hmm.
And way back in the day, I did this class at University of Texas to a whole room full of therapists, and they might as well have had boxes of tomatoes. They were so pissed at what I said. But what I said is, in my perspective, the battered woman is equal to the batterer,
Mm-hmm.
because at the core of their inner being, it not only is a misunderstanding of power, but is that deep wound of enoughness and all the blah blah that we all know.
Yeah.
But we often subjugate, or we make separation between the pattern, and we have to stop doing that, because it implies that one has more power than the other, and this is not true.
Mm-hmm.
It's a matter of, are we receiving, acknowledging that power, and then what are we doing with that power?
Yeah.
You know,
Absolutely.
Carolyn Mace wrote a book called Anatomy of the Spirit back in the 80s, and I don't remember what page it was, but she said that the teachers have to keep getting worse and worse and worse. So maybe a
Mm-hmm.
series of, you might call it abusive boyfriends, or the teachers have to get so much more difficult for that person to realize, like, why am I allowing this? Oh, wait a
Yes.
minute, I have a choice. But the teacher is necessary. I think Abraham
Mm-hmm.
Hicks said it better one time. They said, the person who annoys you the most, the person who hurts you the most, is actually the person who is harassing you into expansion.
Yeah.
But we live in that culture of blame and victim, and we've got to stop promoting that, because it doesn't even help the person who's struggling to
Mm-hmm.
look at that they have choice.
Yes, absolutely. I'm 100% on board with that, because I also believe, on a soul level, they're engaging in that pattern to come back into their wholeness, their healing, their power. And so it's an equal dynamic, even though we see it as unequal, and a victim and abuser. But yeah, it's a it's a dyad of returning to power and remembering and reclaiming power.
Yeah, because I mean, I've worked in prisons. I've worked with a lot of men in my life, and the
Mhm.
most abusive men are the ones that have never been loved.
Mm,
And I'm not citing, I don't ever condone violence to anyone. I just know that until we're able to understand how that pattern plays out on
mhm,
all levels, we'll continue to create polarities in society, what I would call the separation
mhm.
of right and wrong when all of it is necessary to view.
Yes, absolutely. What final thing do you want to share that you feel is important for the viewers that it can relate to the spiritual journey, to self-love, to mysticism? What do you feel like would be most of use?
The one thing that's been on my heart for several years is, and I mean this sincerely, I think the greatest teachers are the ones that at their core are the most non-judgmental, the most open, the most loving, even when somebody is ugly to them. So the Al-Halim, Halima, means the pardoner. That
Mm,
means that I will pardon over and over and over and over again until that person takes their last breath. There's
mm,
nothing that anyone could ever do that I would ever not love somebody. I don't care how ugly their life has been. I don't care how much pain they've been through. I would love for to be a vessel or a mirror for people to work more gently at the notion of judgment, because
mhm,
judgment creates separation
mhm,
and we disconnect from love. Because all of us have had lifetimes where we were murderers or, whatever. So we
mhm.
have to look at how we're holding the notion of love and
Mm.
judgment. That would be the thing I would end with.
And I'll just share this story because I was going to share it before I asked you, and it's a perfect mirror. So this night I was at that party doing my first ever healings and not knowing what I was doing, but just following what I was called to do. So we're at the party, people are dancing. I was not drinking alcohol. Other people were at varying states of inebriation, and I felt the energy of rape enter the building, enter the house, and so I'm like, oh my God, like somebody getting raped right now. So I checked all the bedrooms, nothing's going on. And I'm like, okay, like I'm just feeling this energy of rape very strongly. So about 20 minutes later, a woman walks towards the bathroom and I see two men kind of slinking after her to rape her. They were going obviously to me to rape her in the bathroom. So I just made a beeline and I went in the bathroom with her. The door didn't really lock, and I was like, "Are you okay?" And she's like, "Yeah, those guys have been creeping me out all night. I just need to go to the bathroom." So I held space for her to do that. And then I went out of the bathroom, and these two boy men, they were probably in their mid 20s, they were standing by the front door, and I wasn't I had processed my own sexual assault at a party back in 2007, the night before, with a transgendered Filipino shaman, like just randomly. And I never really acknowledged that I had been sexually assaulted because I wasn't conscious, because I'd been drinking alcohol and he'd given me MDMA and I was unconscious, but there was proof the next day. And when I confronted him, he was like, no, nothing happened. And I was like, okay, that's a lie. But I just have always felt myself to be so powerful that I just didn't consider myself a rape victim. And when I processed that occurrence, there was this like rage against the masculine, the divine masculine, or the other men at the party. Like, where were you? Like, where the fuck were you? Why didn't you protect me? So I processed that the night before. So I walked up to these boys and I put my hands on their arms and I said, we need to go outside and talk. And the bigger one was like, I didn't do anything wrong. You don't need to talk to me. He immediately like went into defensive mode. And I was like, no, we all need to go outside. And so I took them outside and I was just in this place of clarity and knowing and love because I could feel their good hearts. Like I could feel that they had good hearts underneath this darkness, this entity, the alcohol, the cocaine, all the shit that was leading them to go rape a woman in this bathroom at this party. And I just asked, I said, what were your intentions following this woman into the bathroom? And again, the bigger guy was like, "Are you accusing me? I'm gonna," and like he was like his energy was like he was gonna kill me. He was gonna beat me up. And I just held my ground. And the other guy started like, "Oh, we were just gonna do cocaine and we thought his girlfriend was in there." And I just was like, "You have good hearts. Make better choices." And I just said that a few times and they both started crying. And they eventually said yes, like we had bad intentions, and they started talking about their trauma that they had, gone through in their childhood. And I found out, and I did some like hands-on stuff. And then a few days later, I was talking with some friends who were also at the party, and I found out that both of the men were Lakota from the reservation, which they looked white. Like I didn't even know. And I was like, oh, like that's a lot of stuff. And so that night, just that night was my first time ever experiencing entities or anything. I didn't really believe in entities until that night when I felt the rape entity. But I also realized that night of like, oh, every human has a good heart. Every human, every baby is born with a good, pure heart. And then there's all the stuff that gets piled on top. And then there's trauma patterns and all the shit. And so I hold that now of like, I know no matter what anyone does, that they have a good heart under there, and my job is to call that forward. I'll just say, be in your good heart, make better choices if you're harming people.
Yeah. And most people would turn away and make wrongdoing. They would
Yeah.
they would block the opportunity to remind a soul that you can love and choose love, to be, choose to be kind, to be a good human being versus hurting somebody, because nobody hurts somebody else unless they've been hurt.
Yeah.
And so if that person never receives an opportunity like you gave, then they don't realize in that moment that, oh, I can be a good person right now. I can choose differently.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Well, thank you so much for this conversation, and maybe we in the future we can have more. And I'd love to hear about the film that you're working on.
Yeah.
And again, I want to ground in our reality and for myself, but accept that all of this spiritual shit is real, and the energy is real, and the healing is real, and the capacity, like our capacity to remember our divinity and come back to wholeness and like change the world that way by like all of these lights turning on and us doing that together. That's my intention. So thank you for telling your story and for the work that you do, which again we didn't even really get into. Do you have a website, or what do you do, as far as you said you kind of just follow spirit nowadays?
I'm changing the website right now just because there's so
Okay.
much happening with my memoir and the movie and all of this. So I've just kind of been in the background for years working and serving, and but that will be changing this year. But I will definitely let you know when it's up and running. And
Okay. All
yeah,
right.
it's an
Will.
honor to be with your heart, and I appreciate that you shared your story so that your listeners could hear it. I think we're all in it together, and I appreciate the opportunity deeply.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Thank
yeah,
you, Halima.
yeah. I'll see you soon.
Okay.
Okay, bye bye.